Hi, welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm Patsy Shreve.
And I'm Cynthia Martin, and we're your host. Today, we're going to be talking about fear, all kinds of fear. Today, we're going to be talking about every type of fear. There are good types of fear, which you've never been able to convince me many years ago, because for all the fear that I knew was evil fear. But we have obvious fears that we should have a fear not to step out in front of a car. We should have a fear of God himself. And the reason why we have fear is that there is a protective instinct that rises up when we get into a fearful situation so that we don't do dumb stuff. But when we hear the word fear, it always has a negative connotation.
We have to also recognize that there are unhealthy fears, and there are true negatives to the word fear. There's a positive where we know, okay, I don't want to touch that stove, like Cynthia said, because it's going to be hot. And there's the unhealthy, and that unhealthy is what we need to really recognize and understand, because it controls us. It can consume us. It can hinder us. It can stop us. It inhibits our growth, not physically, but spiritually and emotionally. It keeps us stuck in one place. We don't progress and we don't keep going. It even makes us worry about what other people think about us. We're always constantly concerned about what they think and what their opinion is. Mm-hmm. And so we have to determine, what are we really afraid of? What is the bottom line? What is it, and what kind of a negative impact is it having on our life? If it's keeping you controlled or keeping you in one of these areas, then you need to recognize that that's unhealthy, and that we need to figure out how to get healthy in that. I remember one of the greatest fears I had was I ended up, our house went into foreclosure. And I remember laying in bed at night, just worrying and thinking and being so afraid of what was going to happen, so afraid of the future, so afraid of what was going to happen to us. And I remember fretting and worrying and just being so fearful. So it was like strangling me. It was like this huge weight on my chest at night, and I couldn't seem to get it removed. And I started just praying and asking God, what are we going to do? What's going to happen to us? And I said to him, but our car's too small to sleep in and to live in, because we just had this little 4-door compact car. And as I laid there crying out to God, it was like I heard him laugh out loud, and it just stopped me in my tracks. I thought, God, you're laughing at me. I'm serious here. I'm worried. I'm so scared, and you're laughing at me. And it was, he was chuckling, and it was so funny. And once I started thinking about it, all of a sudden I started realizing, my God is so much bigger than that. My God is so much bigger than where am I going to live? What am I going to eat? What does my tomorrow bring? He holds my future in his hand. And I started laughing. And it's like that fear just completely lifted off of me, completely and totally lifted up, because I realized I didn't have any control over it anyway. And so God had it in his control. And so I didn't really have to worry and be afraid of what was going to happen in the future. So I had to realize, how big is my God?
Right.
He's huge. He's enormous. He can handle it.
And that's really great. And I think that's a really good point, Patsy. We've talked about that there are very healthy fears. We've talked about now, our point number 2 is that there are the unhealthy fears, in which we're worried about our future. We can worry about what other people think about us. There's so many things that we can be afraid of. We can be afraid of being exposed. That was one of my big fears, is that people would see the real me and not like me and reject me. And for me, fear was I made friends with it because I thought it was my protection, but also in front of the fear, or what others would see, was anger, because I was very angry. But I was angry trying to protect my fear because I was afraid. So it didn't look like I was afraid. It just looked like I was angry. And so sometimes I think we mislabel emotions. We think that someone's just an angry person, but when we get to when we dig a little deeper, we find out that it's not that they're angry, they're afraid. And in my situation, anger was an emotion that was modeled to me. So that was my go-to emotion that I went to, is anger. That's what protected me. If I've said many times that I can slice and dice, or could. I don't think I can do that anymore, but I could slice and dice. They used to have those little dicers that people chop up onions in little teeny pieces. I felt like I had that ability with my tongue towards other people. It was not a good ability. It was not a good ability. It was very, very evil, because I did that to keep people, when they got close or they made me angry, I would retaliate, because I was so fearful that they would get in and see who I was. And when they saw who I was, they would know that I was lacking. And there's so many things that people are fearful about. I remember having horrible nightmares as a little girl. And so it was an assignment, I think, that the enemy came in through my mom. My mom was a very fearful person. And so it was just modeled to me, and I picked it up, but it was a generational thing, the fear. It came down through many generations. And I remember being a child, and I have a younger brother. He's 2.5 years younger than I am. And I would get up in the middle of the night every night and go and sleep at the end of his bed or on the floor in his room, because I was afraid to be alone. And I know that that was an assignment of the enemy to keep me from the things that I needed to embrace and the things that I needed to see about who I was, in order to be able to do the things that I'm called to do today. But my point today is that, we protect ourselves when we're fearful with other emotions. Sometimes we do it by escape. We hide. Sometimes we will do that with anger and whatever other emotion that we have on the outside of fear that keeps us from getting help or letting people get close and being vulnerable. It's important that other people not just assume because someone's angry that they're just an angry person, that there's more behind the anger. Because if someone had helped me through that, I would have been able to get a lot more free. It wasn't until many years later that someone was able to ask me why I was free and why I was angry, and I was able to tear that down and go to the fear. And then we know that there's even a step underneath fear, but tonight we're talking about fear. But I want to talk about our point number 3. We've already talked about that there is healthy fear, there's unhealthy fear. But we also need to know that God is on our side. When we recognize, or we know that God is a good God, sometimes when we're fearful, we can't recognize that. We can't even see that God is a good God. But point number 3 is recognizing that He is a good Father, and that He is there with us. And He is willing to work with us as we work through our issues, such as anger and fear, and whatever sin that you're involved with, or whatever hurts or pains, or even things that we've got ourselves up in bondage. He will work with us as we move through those things. We don't have to live in the place that we're in. Just because you are fearful today or you're angry today doesn't mean that has to be who you are tomorrow. Just because it's been your past, you've always been this way. Well, you can make a new day. And it can start today or it can start tomorrow. But you can make a new day, and God will live with you in your new place. He lives with you now, but you'll live in a much happier place if you allow God to come in and heal you and set you free from the spirit of fear.
Amen. That's so true. And I think it brings us to, well, how do we not live there? What do we do? What can we do to not just get stuck there, not just have to keep going over the same old fears. And one of the things the Bible says, perfect love casts out fear. And I know sometimes that's hard to understand. Well, okay, what is perfect love? Well, it's God's love. God's love can cast out the fear. So we have to tap into Him.
What does love have to do with fear, Miss Patsy? I don't get it. I never got it. I mean, I have it now, but that was my thing. It made me so angry, and I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, that's
but I mean, it is what it is. I can remember being so angry, and you can see I'm going to get my head going. When people would say, well, perfect love casts out fear. And I'd be like, well, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. How is fear connected to love? And what does that have to do with me being angry and me being afraid? So I'm sorry, Patsy, but I just had to, that's real. That's where I was. It didn't make any sense whatsoever to me.
That's right. And that's where we get down to the reality of it. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Well, how can His love? What can love do? Well, I had to tap into that just to see for myself. to realize, okay, where is it that I am not allowing God to love me, or to love others through me, or to recognize his great love, the great love that he has for his children. And I think when I started recognizing his love for me, then a lot of those fears, I did go back to point number 3, which is knowing that he was on my side, knowing he had my best interest, allowing him to love me as a person, allowing him to just embrace me and call me his beloved even. And that was hard for me to receive that love. I grew up with a father that didn't demonstrate his love towards me. So it was hard to understand that kind of love of a father, that I could just embrace it, and I could accept it, and then pass it on to others. And so what I ask myself, one of the questions I ask myself is, where am I not allowing God's love into my life? What am I really afraid of? And why am I not allowing his love to cover that fear?
And I think, Patsy, right there is you're right on to a great key, is that we talk about that, but allowing God to come into the places that we're fearful is very vulnerable.
Yes.
It's very vulnerable. And a lot of times we're fearful of being vulnerable, but it really it's so healthy to be able to say, what am I really afraid of? So when we get to the root of our fear, then God can deal with our fear. When we're going to be honest, and we're going to be honest with him and be honest with ourselves. So many times we lie to ourselves, whether we even know we're lying to ourselves. And being honest, like you said, where is it that I'm not allowing God to love me is really the key. And that's when I got the picture. And I'm sure I've told you this story, Patsy. We've just been together so long and done so many things together that you've heard about this. But I was working in pastoral care at one time, and I stopped your point, Patsy. I'm sorry, but we had a prophet come into the office, and he said he knew he was coming in because he had to tell somebody something, and he looked right at me. Well, I had a huge issue with men at this time in my life, and pretty healed, but I was a single woman, and there was no man going to take me no side and talk to me. Man of God, prophet of God, whoever God he wasn't going to do that. And so, I mean, I had some pretty thick walls, and some of those are very wise as a single woman. And I was trying to I was living a very holy life, and I was very dedicated to the Lord. But my boss at the time, who was a very dear friend of both of ours, said, "It's okay, I'll go with you." And I was like, "Okay, if you're with me, we'll do that." And he began to just read my mail about not being open, and that God wanted me to open myself to him so that I could receive love. I was so fearful I couldn't receive love. And I was not able, he wanted me to do it right then. Well, there was no way I was going to open myself up. I didn't know, I thought that was kind of weird. But I remember going home, and I'm not sure if you was going to go through the exercise of what I did. And I know we've used it in ministry a lot, but that started me on a journey of connecting. He connected the dots for me. He helped me see that the fear came out of the place that I wasn't allowing love to come in. Now I know how perfect love casts out fear, because if I'm totally loved in every place, what do I have to be afraid of?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. Exactly.
I interrupted your point. I apologize.
Oh, that's fine. I love it when you and reinforce what's being said. And that's the whole thing. You have to determine what's the worst that can happen. And what can man do to you? I mean, when you disassemble that fear and get to the bottom, the root of that, then you can start receiving the love that God has for you, because you realize man can't do anything without God. I mean, God's my everything. And
either he's in charge or he's not, right?
Right, absolutely. And so then you can start receiving all the good things that he has for you.
Exactly. And, I think it's important that we recognize that sometimes we need someone else to speak to that place, because we're so in bondage to our fear and to our way of thinking that we can't see past what we know to be true, which experience has showed us. which we have protected ourselves for years with this fear, with this anger, with whatever emotion. So we can't see anything. I remember, I laugh about it today, and telling someone when I was going through ministry, they said, well, that's not the truth. What is the truth? And I said, well, maybe it's not your truth, but it's my truth. It was my truth. And I couldn't see past that. I had to have someone else help me find the truth. Once I got the truth and I broke agreement, then I was fine. But I had to have help to find the truth. And there are some areas that people can be healed, can get set free on their own. Praise God. But there are some places in certain people that they have more of a bondage, that they can't do it on their own. And I'm so thankful that that man came into the office, that I had someone challenge my thinking, that I was able to get the full truth in order to be set free.
I think that's important, because sometimes it will take somebody else and what they say to jar us out of that place where we are stuck, or where we're gotten stopped, or it's consuming us, and that will just kind of rattle us enough so that we can shock us to start thinking about those kinds of things. So that's
exactly. It was almost as if sometimes it's like an arrow got shot right in. It got right through all of my protective barrier, and just like, oh, clunk, it hit me. And I was like, almost, breathless, and, had to immediately get my wall back up again. It got past and got into where I was vulnerable, because it was truth. Because does God's word say that it's sharper than a two-edged sword, and it divides between, it can get through the places that other places can't. And so that's what truth can do. Right. And so when we our points here, because we're trying to stay on topic here and make sure we help everyone who's listening, is that we recognize that there are healthy fears. We need to have fear that God, the word tells us that we need to have a fear of God. It's a reverential type fear. Then we need to recognize that there are unhealthy fears that we need help. We need healing. We need deliverance from. Then we need to know that God is with us, and he's not going to leave us in that place if we really, truly want help. And then we need to be able to ask God to fill us full of love, so that every place can eradicate that fear, because perfect love casts out fear. And so if you have fear, you need love in that place. Now, getting the love in that place is different.
You almost said perfect fear casts out love, and that is true also.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. It is true.
It casts out love also. So
it does. And so you get to choose which one you want to live in. Do you want to live in perfect fear, or do you want to live in perfect love? And that is true. So, our point number 5 is that we need to seek the peace of God. And we need to get to the place where we recognize that only in God are we going to be able to find that peace. And Jesus, he prayed in the garden that not his will, but God's will. And fear really is a trauma in our life. It wreaks havoc on our emotions. It lures us and draws us into thinking about the very thing that we fear. We're consumed with that thing that's fearful. And it torments our soul, and it grips us from the inside. And so we need to get to that place to where we can, let me see if I can think of a different word to describe it. We need to be in a place and where we are so anchored in who God is and his total love for us, that we have a dear friend, Judy Bryant, and she has the greatest one-liners. I will call her and she will say some one-liner that will just put me a Twitter for months, I'm telling you. And so she has these little one-liners, and I always remember about Miss Judy. She would always say, "Let peace be your guide, Cynthia. Let peace be your guide." And she lives in that place. She refuses to live in any other state than peace. And so we can get to a place when we realize that our peace is like a rudder or a sail. When it is taking us off course, we can draw ourselves back and say, okay, God, where am I going wrong? Where is it that I'm not receiving your love? What have I stepped into that I should not have? Where should I back out of where I went? Should I plunge on through? But God, there's my peace is being disturbed, and we must always allow our peace to be our guide.
That's right. And that brings us to point 6, which is be strong and courageous. Sometimes there's circumstances that are out of our control. And so it's very difficult sometimes to find that peace, but we just have to stand strong and be courageous and know that God is going to be there with us. The Lord spoke to Joshua, to so many of his people to be strong and courageous. Over more than 10 times in the Bible did he say, be strong and courageous. He also said, do not be afraid. A lot of times angels would come, and at first, people's first instinct was go, oh no. And they'd say, don't be afraid. Over 70 times. Some people say that it's 365 times that they found in the Bible where it said, do not be afraid. One for each day of the week. I don't know. I haven't gone through to count.
Either. I've not counted them.
But I thought that was quite interesting. That would be really fascinating if it turned out to be 365 days or 365 times to equal 365 days, one per day, that we need to remind ourselves to be strong and courageous and do not be afraid. We have to sometimes, I know when I was getting ready to move all the way across the country from Oregon to Pensacola, to start a brand new life, practically, it was very scary.
And we weren't just out of college either, were we, Patsy?
No, we weren't. We had careers. We were in the middle of everything, and to uproot your family and to take them clear across the United States to a brand new place where you didn't know hardly anybody at all and didn't know what was going to happen. And I know it became very scary. I knew we were supposed to do it. I knew it was God's directive and what we were supposed to do. In my heart, I knew that's what we were supposed to do. But just when you start to process that and think about that in your mind, you start getting into your flesh, and it's like, oh my gosh, that fear comes in. And I remember God spoke very specifically to me. He said, hold my hand, hold my hand. And I thought, okay, I'm holding your hand, God. I'm holding my hand, because I figured, okay, he's going to take me where I need to go. He's going to lead me, and he's going to take me where, he's going to see me through this. He's going to get me there. He's going to get me what I need. And then he spoke very distinctly and said, and let go with your other hand. And I thought, oh, wait a minute. Because you're right, exactly. You're trying to hang on to the Lord, and you're hanging on to this back here that's holding you back, what you're afraid of. And you have to sometimes just totally just let go of that fear, let go of it, so that God can take you forward and take you out of that and lead you out of that fear. Because it can be, we have to learn to trust him, that he knows what's best, that he will get us there. If he's called us to do something, if he's told us to do something, if he's directing us and leading us, then we need to trust him in that and know that he will order our steps, even though we can't see them all the times. I know sometimes I like the whole path illuminated way ahead of time, so I can see all the way down the street, but God doesn't always do that. In fact, very rarely does that. Most of the time, he illuminates one step at a time. And if I take that step and I give up that fear and release that fear and just take that one step, then he'll reveal the next step and the next step and the next step and the next step to get me where he wants me to go.
That's true. And fear really, as a Christian, is not a destination for us. It is not a destination where God wants us to go and camp out. It is not his place. That is not what he does. And so our 7th point is to seize the moment. And you're like, what? Seize the moment. But, you think about Gideon. He was really afraid. And he, did all these fleeces and he did all these things. But, in the end, he went ahead and he obeyed God. You're going to have to probably help me, Patsy, but I'm thinking about the parable about the 2 sons. When the father says to the son, go and do this, and the son says, yes, I will, but he doesn't. And he tells the other son to do it, and he doesn't act like he should, but then he goes and does it. God gives us grace. He gives us that time for us to assimilate. This is right. I don't like it. It scares me. I'm frightened. I'm afraid. But I really want to go with God. So I'm going to go. My knees and my whole body's going to be shaken, but I'm going to go. And that's how I see Gideon, is that his knees were shaken, but he went ahead and did it anyway. Because there comes a point in our life when we realize either we believe this or we don't. We either believe God's true or we don't. It's one or the other. And we have to step out and believe that he will meet us if we will step out and do it. So, you know, one of the other things I wanted to put is kind of like the opposite side. And of course, this is where my mind always goes. When we seize the moment, or when we recognize our fear, you know, it's a opportunity to step into a new place of absolute trust in God's deliverance and his healing. But also when we seize the moment in our fear. And what I mean by that is when we decide, okay, this fear is mine, and I'm going to own it in the place that I'm going to be real with myself, is we can recognize that the enemy always overplays his hand. He always does. And so when he overplays his hand, it becomes obvious, well, duh, the enemy is involved in this. And then he will even expose some extra things, because not only does he get us in a place of fear, but he begins to magnify those places. And it's like, oh, thank you, you know, for showing that to me, devil. Now I can deal with it. I know what the root of it is, because he always overplays his hand. And so I think it's really important that as we look at fear, there's so many kinds of fears. We can be fearful of being vulnerable ourselves. We can be consumed with fear for our grandchildren or our children. We can be afraid of what other people would see, you know, what will think of us. We can be afraid to go, you know, Patsy and I have a friend that we know who is so fearful she won't leave her house. It's not God. To where when you have something in your life that is so controlling you that it impedes you from going out and meeting with God's people, that is not a godly, healthy fear. And so there are so many things that people fear to animals. I mean, at the end, the list can be endless. But the important part is that it stems out of a place where we don't believe that we're valuable enough to be loved, or in a place in which we've not allowed God to get into to love us completely. Because truly, if we're truly loved by God, when we know that we know that we know on our innermost being that we're loved by God, what can harm us? I mean, if God be for us, who can be against us? I mean, what are you going to do to me? I mean, have at it. But I have a big, big God. I have a God who protects me. I have a God who directs me. I have a God who takes care of me. And, you know, take your best shot. And what I mean by that is when he will take care of me. He will either enter the battle and he will stop what's occurring with me, or he will use that for my own good. Oh, that gets really ugly, doesn't it? But it's true. It produces character in me. When I can trust my God enough that I will allow things to happen to me that may not be perfect. He never promised me a perfect life, but he did promise me that he'll be in it and in my life, and he will deliver me.
That's so true. So true.
Mm-hmm.
And it all goes back to just trusting him, to letting go and trusting him. And like Cynthia said, you have to face what it is. You have to recognize it. So our points today were recognizing that there are some fears that are healthy, that there are unhealthy fears also that can cause problems in our life, that we know that God is on our side. Who can be against me if God's on my side?
Exactly.
We have to be filled with his love and allow his love to fill and completely consume us. We have to seek the peace of God, to let him provide that peace for us, and to see what his peace in the midst of the fear looks like. We have to be strong and courageous and stand strong and be not afraid. We have to seize that moment. Well, it looks like we're out of time today.
Before we get going though, Patsy, I know that we have to close up, but you know what? I just really feel a led of the Holy Spirit to pray over someone who's listening right now. And I just want to speak to that person right now who's so afraid that you're wondering inside, could that be for me? Would God really love me in such a way that I could let go of my fear, or that he would take this fear from me? I want to tell you, yes, he will. You would not have recognized who I was so many years ago. I've had people that I have met from my former life, back when I was below 30 and before that says, it's like you're a whole new person. I'm looking at you and I know this is you, but you are a whole new person. I'm here to tell you that, yes, he can set you free from fear. And that when the enemy says this isn't for you, that's a lie from the pit of hell. because God loves you enough. He loves you as much as he loves me. He loves you as much as he loves Patsy, that God is no respecter of persons, that he loves us all the same, and he loves us individually. He has great plans for you. He has a great love for you. He has a great purpose for you, and he has a great plan for your life. You need to reach out to him and ask him to show you how to fill those places with love, because I'm telling you, my friend, that he can do it. He wants to, and he will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we thank you so much for joining us today. We just want to make sure that we are helping see, because our heart is to see you set free, to see you break free from these things, to see that are hindrances in your life. Our heart is to see deliverance, healing, and to see you just drawing so close to the Lord that he becomes just brand new and so exciting in your life, and such a joy to experience. And so we hope that this can help you put aside some of those things that could be hindrances in your life. And we just want you to be all that you can be, and do all that you can do in him.
Amen. So we're going to say goodbye today, and we'll see you next time on Lunch and Learn.